Tamil cinema has a knack of making films that do not stick to a particular genre. They love the masala films, of course, but in the not so masala-ish films, even then, they ensure that there are multiple genres involved that makes audience look forward to something that they like at any point of the film. Vanakkam and welcome to Cinema Express. This is Avinash Ramachandran, and in this video review episode, we are going to look at director Rajavel's debut film Housemates, starring Darshan, Aarsha, Kaali Venkat, Vinothini, and a bunch of other actors. The film wastes no time in setting the premise. There is Karthik, who is played by Darshan. He is an orphan who has no family in this world, who has no particular possessions in this world, and he has to buy a house to ensure that his prospective father-in-law accepts the marriage with the character played by Aarsha called Anu. So what happens is they need a house. That is a priority. Somehow, by hook or crook and bribing and a few interesting jokes here and there, finally Karthik gets a house. And in that house, he somehow gets the marriage also done, and they have a happy life. Everything is going on smooth till one day, Anu finds curtains suddenly, moving on their own, chairs being creaky, of course, taps and water suddenly starting to overflow, the flush starting to automatically do its job, and then you've got flickering lights, random drawings on the walls. You know, the usual tropes for a horror film. And that's where Housemates subverts it in a very, very neat way. But till the point of subversion happens, we are fed with very, very template and cliched scenes that aim to cater to the horror element of the film. But that doesn't really work, mainly because the first time you see a certain horror element again is when you see a crayon drawing on the wall. That somehow makes it a very children-based thing, right? So, mostly in Tamil cinema, with a very upbeat kind of a mood that is being set in Housemates, you don't really think that they are in real danger. Because the kid involved who's just drawing on the walls, you don't really are expecting something horrific to happen. So this gives us two sets of characters, one played by Darshan and Aarsha, and the other one's played by Kaali Venkat and Vinothini. What really connects them is, of course, the house, and the film doesn't really go deep into these things to confuse us. It tells the rules of this world very simply. It tells us that A happens, B will happen. If B happens, C will also happen, but if D happens, doesn't really mean that A should happen. The world has simple rules and the film follows it to a T, and the characters ensure that we are completely engrossed in what's happening, even if there is a sense of repetition to what really unfolds in Housemates. The problems are clear, the solutions are clear, and we understand what is happening between these two families, how they're going to go about it, how they understand what's happening, how they make way for each other, how they navigate through a very particularly unique incident that's happened in their lives. And of course, like any good horror film / sci-fi template that Indian cinema generally adopts, there is a reason for all of this to happen, and that is not just science. And that's where sentiment kicks in, and Housemates uses this perfectly. You are completely convinced by what's going to happen. After a point, the scientific conversations don't bother you. You are completely convinced. You're completely drawn into the idea of Housemates, and that is the strength of the film. Rajavel doesn't use a lot of mumbo jumbo or say huge words to say that, you know, this happened, you know, that happened. And the way they all come to terms with it also doesn't really cry for logic, simply because why would you not believe these things? And because every piece of logic points towards these things, and even the way the questions are being asked of each other in the entire film, you sometimes wonder why didn't they ask this question beforehand, but then it's okay. It's okay, let them find their way through their problem, let them find their way through something that is so unique that they have no clue how to navigate. So I didn't mind these portions at all. I just was completely convinced that these two families would behave in this particular way, and that was completely convincing on screen, and the actors pull it off too. The filmmaker believes that the science of Housemates is not too tough to comprehend. He simplifies it. He doesn't really want you to, let's say, go through a textbook of physics or scour the internet to understand what's kind of happening. It's a very straightforward thing. Since sentiment rules roost in Housemates, the science factor doesn't really bother people much, and the sentiment is very, very strong. It makes you wonder what happened to the people on the other side of the wall. It makes makes you want to believe that people are really invested in each other's lives, although they are at each other's necks almost throughout the runtime of the film. But when things actually start to unfold, when things actually start to make sense to each other, it's the same time it makes sense to us too. And I like the whole idea of how we don't really get to know anything before the leads get to know about each other. So it's nice in a way that we aren't predicting what's going to happen, we are seeing what's happening through the eyes of the protagonists. So that kind of a treatment really works for Housemates. And apart from the family sentiment, the film also talks a lot about the sentiment of the house. Why both sets of people wouldn't leave the house, very simply because they have invested so much of their time, space, money, resources, blood, sweat, everything on the house, and why it's such a huge emotion in their lives. And that is why we don't really want them to leave the space and do something else. We have seen this ego clash in very recent films, like for instance Parking, but this film uses a very similar trope of two let's say warring neighbors coming to terms with each other, but in a very quirky way, very unique way. And that's what the strength of Housemates is. The other thing about Housemates is that it never stops making you smile, even when they're fighting with each other, even if they're trying to sabotage each other, even if they're trying to make sense of what's happening. There's an undercurrent of humor that is always working, but that humor is also not your laugh out loud moments, because the filmmaker also understands the gravity of what is happening. There is science, there is horror, there is a lot of mismatch of both. There is idea of family sentiment, this idea of a budding romance, there's comedy, there is sentiment. Everything is in equal proportions in Housemates. And even when there are certain scenes that actually extend their welcome, especially with people trying to buy the house, the whole sequences don't really leave the necessary impact, but as a standalone scenes, those work. And the runtime of the film also works in favor of it, because you can't really stretch this beyond a point, and the film doesn't do it at all. The film is very clear that it's about causation and correlation, and it doesn't really push these ideas down our throats. It's very simple. If you want to think about the science of it, feel free. If you don't want to see it, you still have a very nice, charming film with wonderful performances, especially by Kaali Venkat, who it seems like he can't do anything wrong this year. He's had a wonderful year, a wonderful few years, but he's quite good in this film, and so is Vinothini, who is actually given a very largely one-note character, but she makes the most of it. And to credit to Darshan, who really looks much more assured than his previous two films, and Aarsha continues from what she left off in Malayalam in a very, very strong Tamil debut. There's a wonderful scenes where the horror, the idea of a ghost and this whole what is happening to us slowly transform into, oh, this is what's happening to us, let's deal with it. And that's when the comedy also starts to kick in. I loved how the narrative also is that way. Till the film doesn't really tell us and to the leads what's happening, the film is treated as a very serious film. But once this transition happens, the film is a hoot and a half. Full points to the makers for ensuring that nothing overstays its welcome, nothing is an overdose, nothing is let's say unnecessary. Everything feels in just right amount of proportions, and that is probably why Housemates is one of the easier films to watch this year, as in it is not trying too hard, but it's also not without merit. It's not something that is easy. There is a lot of thought process to it, but the thought process is not just to put out a new novel idea, but also to ensure that translates to us without making us try too hard. And I think that is the biggest strength of Housemates, and that is why Rajavel's debut film is one of the most interesting films that's come this year, but also the simplest, and also probably one of the more enjoyable films that has come out in recent times. If you like this review, do like, share and subscribe to Cinema Express, and do let us know what you thought of this film and this review. Until we meet in the next episode, this is your friendly neighborhood critic Avinash Ramachandran signing off. Tata.